Chapter 11. John was now a heroin addict. Like I said before, he supported his habit by robbing soda and candy machines and phone booths. His addiction defined him. The drug was the center of his life, and he spent most of his time trying to figure out how to continue to supply himself. To make more out of what he did get a hold of, he began to mainline. He injected the boiled drug directly into his veins. It made the high more powerful, yet, at the same time, he needed more of the drug to attain the same high. Like every other junkie, he took one step forward and two back. The pain in his hand only left him when he was high, and he could not stay high 24 hours a day, so he went through a lot of bad times. The surgeons had done a poor job grafting the skin around his wound. He was prone to infections in his right hand and was constantly having to buy antibiotics as well as heroin. His habit was now costing him $500 a day. Do you know how many quarters that is? 2,000. That's a lot of machines to rob just to stay even. It was hopeless, really. He had to go on to bigger game. John started to break into houses in middle-class neighborhoods. He got to be something of an expert when it came to casing out houses. He never broke into homes when he thought people were there. Of course, he miscalculated a few times and nearly got his brains blown out. But he wouldn't carry a gun. He didn't want to hurt anybody and never really had, except for the time he punched Sims in the mouth. His hand worked against him as a thief. Too many tasks that went with the territory, like picking locks and silently lifting stuck windows, required two good hands. When he did get inside, he was able only to steal small stuff: jewelry, watches, cash. Occasionally he'd swipe a portable stereo or a VCR, but he had to resell the stuff for pennies because he could only do business with the blackest part of the black market. His main drug supplier, an addict himself, suggested he do a little dealing on the side to help make ends meet. Being a pusher wasn't John's style. Besides, it was dangerous. He only tried it for a couple of weeks when he was robbed in the middle of the night by a guy with a switchblade. John lost his entire supply of drugs and 2 pints of blood. The assailant laid John's belly wide open. He had to rush to the hospital holding his guts in. It took 40 stitches to sew him back together. John was pretty hardened to the horrors of life by this time, but that incident scared him badly. He went back to straight stealing, a safe occupation. Man, life sucked. It really did. John was back in the hospital not long after that. He had caught another type of infection, hepatitis. A dirty needle was no doubt to blame. He didn't want to go into the hospital, but the doctor he saw told him he'd die if he didn't, and the way John felt, he figured the man was probably right. He had never been so sick in his life. He couldn't walk across the room without having to stop and rest. He had a problem with the hospital, though, once he was inside. They wouldn't give him any heroin, of course. But then they wouldn't even give him methadone to help him with withdrawal. His doctor explained that he had to be in a special program to get methadone, and that it was an outpatient program only. You couldn't be in the hospital and join. John took the news hard. He was sick from hepatitis and from withdrawal. To top it off, his old friend, Mr. Three-Fingered Hand, was complaining. He couldn't take the pain. He just couldn't. And it wasn't his fault. Pain can make a proud man humble. Pain can make a good man turn bad. One evening, when John had been in the hospital a couple of days, he got out of bed around 9 o'clock, wearing only a bathrobe, and went searching for a nurse's station that had been left unattended. He didn't wait till later, because he knew the nurses changed shifts at 9, and he hoped to take advantage of the change in shifts. The hospital was full of places to snitch drugs. John didn't want much, just a little something to knock him out so he could sleep. That wasn't much to ask, but the nurses in his ward wouldn't give him anything stronger than Tylenol. What was Tylenol to a heroin addict? It was like giving cookies to a hungry tiger. John didn't find any drugs. He had only searched a couple of floors when he spotted a nurse at the far end of the hall. She had her back to him and was waiting for the elevator. She appeared to be going off duty. Even from behind, she looked familiar to John. He moved a few steps closer, hanging onto a laundry basket to keep from falling over. He really shouldn't have been out of bed. The elevator door opened, and a guy about 25 years old, accompanied by a kid who was maybe 5, stepped into the hall. The nurse shouted with pleasure. The two had obviously surprised her by coming to pick her up at work. The little boy ran into the nurse's arms, shouting "Mommy," and the guy hugged the woman, and the two of them had a long kiss. John saw the nurse's face when she let go of the guy. He recognized her in an instant. It was Candy. He almost died right then. He was close to dying, and in the space of 2 seconds he took a huge step closer. His heart just broke. Candy, his girl, in the arms of some jerk. And with a kid. John couldn't stop staring at the boy. He looked like his child. He really did. Certainly, he didn't look like he belonged to the gorilla hugging Candy. The feeling that his family had been stolen from him without his knowing it overwhelmed John. He sagged against the wall. It was a miracle he didn't collapse on the floor. Then Candy turned and stared straight at him, but she didn't see him. Oh, she saw a patient, a very sick young man, but she didn't see John. He could have been invisible as he had been the last few years. Nevertheless, she raised a hand to her face and took a step in his direction. She was maybe 100 feet away. "Do you need help, sir?" she asked. A tear ran down John's face. He shook his head. "Get back to bed," Candy called. "You'll feel better soon." John nodded. Candy turned and disappeared into the elevator with her family. He thought they looked happy together. John walked back to his room and changed into the clothes he had been wearing when he entered the hospital. He left without checking out. The night sky was filled with clouds. His car was parked in the lot, an old piece of junk that wasn't worth the cost of the registration sticker on the license plate. It was all he had left in the world. He didn't even have his memories anymore, because the only ones he had cherished had been from his time in high school with Candy. But now she had stolen them from him, turned them to grief. He blamed her for not waiting for him. It sounds crazy, but in his heart he had always believed he'd find her again and that they would be together. Just as soon as he got his life back on track, he had told himself. But now there was no possibility of that. His life was over. He felt it end when he saw her beautiful face at the end of the hall. Yeah, she was still as beautiful after all these years, and here he was, a corpse just waiting to start rotting. John needed a fix in the worst way. He drove to his most trusted friend, his pusher. The bastard wouldn't give him any heroin. He wanted money, and John didn't have any. John pleaded with him, but it was like pleading with the devil to please lower the thermostat. Yet the guy did do something John wouldn't have expected. He ran in the back and got an unmarked handgun and gave it to him. John just stared at the gun. He had never used one before, and tonight was not a good night to start. His left hand was shaking along with his right because he was so weak. "Pull a job, bring me some cash," his friend said. "Then I'll see what I can do for you." John nodded. He left the place. He still didn't want to hurt anybody, but everybody was hurting him. All he wanted was one fix, just one shot straight into his veins, and he knew he'd be able to think clearly again. He imagined that if he could just get that one fix, he might check himself back into the hospital. Then maybe Candy would drop down a couple of floors and nurse him back to health. He laughed at the absurdity of the idea as he drove through the stormy night, the rain plastering his windshield, his tears plastering his face. He knew he wasn't going back to the hospital. He knew he was going nowhere. He drove for a long time before he spotted a store that looked deserted enough to hit. But he hadn't gone far because he drove mainly in circles. He parked in front of the mini-mart and climbed out into the night. He was wet. He was cold. He staggered toward the door. He couldn't see anyone inside except for the short fellow behind the counter. He figured he'd whip out his gun, get the money, and be gone in the blink of an eye. He was thinking about how good the fix would feel bubbling in his veins when he opened the door and stepped inside. He had the gun hidden in his belt under his coat. He was so out of it he hadn't even checked to see if it was loaded. He didn't stride straight up to the counter and get down to the robbing business, however. He wasn't sure why, but it might have been because he was inexperienced. After he was inside the store, he thought it might be a good idea to first browse around, maybe pick out a few items, and then saunter up to the counter. Then, when the guy was ringing up the stuff, he could whip out his gun. Yeah, he thought, that sounded like a plan. Even a dying man needed a plan. The guy in the store followed his every move. John picked out items that he actually wanted: a 6-pack of beer, a box of donuts, a carton of milk. He didn't know if he would be able to keep any of the food down. He'd been vomiting nonstop for the last week, but he thought the stuff would be better than what they'd been trying to feed him at the hospital. He walked up to the counter and piled the goods up. The employee looked him over real close and asked to see his ID. That made John laugh. "I look like I'm ready to bury, and you want to see if I'm legal?" John asked. "Sure, I'll show you my ID. I've got it right here." John pulled out his gun and pointed it at the guy, who immediately raised his hands. Yet he didn't look that surprised. It was as if he got held up regularly. John told him to give him every dollar he had. The guy popped the cash register and began to stack the dollar bills on the counter. John thought he was doing pretty well for a first-timer. Then a young woman entered the store. John glanced over at her and almost dropped his gun. It was Candy. But it couldn't be Candy, he thought. Not twice in the same day. Man, talk about fate. It was a night of nightmares. Candy had her eyes open now. She ran toward him, calling his name. At the same time, the guy behind the counter crouched down, going almost out of sight, reaching for something that John would have bet the clothes he had was standing in was a gun. John didn't want the guy to come back up shooting, so he fired a shot into the bottles on the wall behind the counter. Seagram 7 splattered everywhere, and the air was thick with the smell of whiskey. "I wouldn't if I was you," John told the guy. Slowly the man began to stand back up, his hands in the air once more. All this time, of course, John had Candy hurrying toward him, calling his name. Well, she had never had good timing, he thought. He shook his gun in her direction and shouted, "Stay!" Candy stopped. She stared at him with her big brown eyes. "It's me, John," she said. "I don't know any John," he said. She took a step toward him. She didn't even have the decency to put her hands in the air, and here it was, his first holdup. "That's not going to work," she said. "I know who you are, and you know who I am." She grimaced. "What are you doing with that gun? You look terrible." He sneered. "I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to get the gun color coordinated with my outfit. Get the hell out of here, Candy. Can't you see I'm busy? She was ashen, an improvement, though, over John's color. His hepatitis had turned him the color of a sick lemon. She took another step toward him. Not many more, and she would be able to reach out and take the gun from him. It was you I saw at the hospital this evening, she said. It took you long enough to notice, he said. That means you're sick, she said. You should be in bed. She stopped and grimaced again. What happened to your hand? That question really annoyed John. He hadn't seen her in God knows how long, and she had to immediately point out his most sensitive flaw. I tell you, that Candy had no class. I got it caught in a hot dog bun machine, he said bitterly, his voice cracking. But I don't want to talk about it right now. I want you to get out of here. I want you to go home to your husband and your son, and I want you to leave me alone. John fired another shot into the whiskey bottles, the dark liquid in the glass flying everywhere. The guy behind the counter had begun to fidget in ways John didn't appreciate. You finish counting out my money or I'll kill you, he screamed. The guy got back to work emptying the cash register. Candy just stood where she was, staring at John. He was surprised when she started weeping. What's happened to you? She cried. Why are you doing this? He never did get a chance to tell her why, because right then all three of them heard police sirens. They were close. It sounded as if the cops would be there in seconds. That they were heading straight for the store, John didn't doubt for a second. He realized the guy behind the counter must have pressed a button the instant John pulled the gun. No wonder the guy had been emptying the register so slowly. He knew he had help coming. Damn it, John swore. He switched the gun to his bad hand and tried scooping the money off the counter with his left and into his pockets. But he was in too much of a hurry, and most of it ended up on the floor. The sirens grew louder. They were practically outside the door. He wouldn't be able to go out the front way, he realized. He'd have to try to escape out the back. He turned away from Candy. He could see the rear exit at the end of a narrow, dark hallway. Don't run, John, Candy cried at his back. They'll kill you. He was in no mood to listen to her. He might have been if he hadn't seen her that evening at the hospital with her family. He might have become a changed man right then, just knowing she was around. But she had let him down again. She had cheated on him with another man. He ran down the hallway toward the rear exit. It was locked. His luck was rotten. He pounded on the wire mesh door with his bad hand, and his pain and sorrow and fear in that moment were of truly tragic proportions. He was a trapped and wounded animal. He glanced back the way he had come. The other guy had guts. John had to hand it to him. Even with the police only seconds away, he was going for his gun. John pointed his own in the guy's direction, just above his head, and let loose a shot. The bullet hit the front window of the store, and the entire sheet of glass collapsed. The checker jumped and raised his hands over his head. John ran back to the front of the store. He was passing the counter when two police officers pounced inside, their revolvers drawn. Freeze, they shouted in unison. John froze for only a second. Then he did something he wouldn't have believed he'd have done in a million years. Of course, that was just the point. He had only a split second to react. He grabbed Candy and placed her in front of him as a shield. She didn't make a sound. Hanging on to her by the hair, he raised his gun to her head. Drop your guns, John ordered. If you don't, I'll kill her. The police glanced at each other. They were young, inexperienced. They had made a mistake, both coming into the store at the same time. John could see only one car outside. They had no backup. They were scared. They didn't want to drop their guns. They had no idea what he would do. He had no idea. He just wanted a moment to think, to have a shot of heroin and be at peace. Or maybe just a moment to talk to Candy. He had a gun to her head, true, but right then he imagined a talk might be nice, that she might be able to set his mind and body at peace. "John," Candy said calmly, "I have to tell you something." Her speaking surprised him. She should have been crying or screaming, but she said his name so normally he couldn't help but respond. "What?" he asked. She didn't get a chance to answer him. One of the cops had dropped his gun, but the other wasn't going to chance it. He wasn't going to risk his life, although he was all too happy to risk the life of an innocent bystander. He aimed his gun at John, who stood ever so slightly to the left of Candy. Naturally, though, being half a foot taller than Candy, John was exposed. The cop fired. The bullet caught John in the side of the neck. It hit him with the force of a freight train. John let go of Candy and dropped to his knees. His blood gushed over his shirt. The cop fired again. This bullet caught John in the belly. It tore open the scar where he had been knifed. More blood poured out. That was all John could see for a moment, his life draining away from him onto the dirty floor of the mini-mart. He didn't want it to end this way, looking down into the dirt. He spent the last few years of his life crawling in the mud, and he wanted to go out with a vision of something beautiful. He looked up and saw Candy staring down at him. She smiled, he thought. She smiled. Suddenly everything started to go dark, but he still had his gun in his hand. He could feel it. Oddly enough, he had it in his right hand, and the fingers in the last few seconds of his life, even the phantom fingers, suddenly stopped hurting. His whole hand felt whole again. It was the most wonderful feeling. He flexed his hand. "Well, can I say that and have you believe it? Or should I just say he pointed the gun at Candy and fired? That would probably be closer to the truth, because he did shoot her. And it would be fair to say he wanted to, either because of what she had done to him or simply because he didn't want to die alone on the dirty floor." He shot Candy in the heart, and her smile faded as a big dark stain formed in the center of her shirt. He watched her fall toward the floor, slowly, but he didn't see her hit. He heard another shot, and it must have been from the cop, because his own gun had fallen out of his hand. He saw a flash of red. He heard an eerie splat sound. As he fell backward, he figured it must have been the sound of his brains hitting the wall behind him. He died. They both did. But doesn't everybody? Free paused. And that's the story of John and Candy. "God," Teresa whispered, shocked by the sudden, violent ending. "Would you say I described everything accurately, my dear?" Free asked Poppy. "Just beautifully, Jack," Poppy said. Chapter 12. They didn't talk much after the death of John and Candy. Free leaned back and began to snore softly. Poppy did not resume her endless chain smoking. But periodically she would flick her lighter, stare at the flame for a few seconds, and then put it out. Teresa, for her part, continued to fight against the pain in her body. She searched for a place to turn off and buy aspirin. Several times she thought she'd have to pull over to the side and vomit. In reality, the farther she went, the more confused she became about their whereabouts. They had passed San Luis Obispo enough hours ago that they should have entered Big Sur. And they had entered a wooded area, but the trees were not redwoods. She didn't know what they were, except that they were tall and dark and incredibly bunched together. The branches on the trees frightened her. They hung like tired arms, and sometimes they shook even when the wind wasn't blowing. She could no longer see the ocean, although she believed she could hear it. The sound of water had followed her since she got in her car earlier that evening. Falling rain and crashing waves, water running as she was running. Finally, though, the rain began to let up. "We're almost there," Poppy said suddenly, after a silence that could have lasted an hour. "Almost where?" Teresa asked. "My father's place," Poppy said. Teresa groaned. She really wasn't in the mood for games. "The church?" she asked. "Yes," Poppy said. "Can we stop there?" "I really don't think so," Teresa said, annoyed. "I don't feel good, and I want to get to San Francisco before I collapse. Would it be all right with you if we skip the social call? Your father must be in bed at this time anyway." "He's awake," Poppy said. "Poppy?" "What?" "I told you I don't want to stop. This is my car and I'm driving. You should respect that and not bother me." Poppy was silent a moment. "You'll feel better if you let my father hear your confession." "How will going to confession make me feel better? I have a headache, my wrist is aching, I've got the shakes, and I want to throw up. I need a doctor, I don't need a priest." "I can't force you to stop," Poppy said. Teresa snorted. "Well, I'm glad to hear that." "But you have nowhere else to stop." Teresa paused. "What do you mean?" "You've been looking for a turnoff for a while now. You haven't seen any. You won't see any until you come to the church. And who can say what comes after that?" Teresa was incredulous. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. There will be plenty of places to stop just as soon as we get out of these woods. Soon we'll be in Carmel and then Monterey." "Is the road to those places open?" Poppy asked. "How many cars have you seen coming from the other way?" "A few, not many." "You haven't seen any lately," Poppy said. "Stop at the church, rest for a while, get your strength back. You're going to need it." "For what?" Teresa asked. "Who knows?" Poppy said. Teresa squeezed the steering wheel. Her palms were still clammy. They were practically dripping onto the wheel. It made no sense. She had never felt this way before. It must be all the cigarette smoke Poppy was forcing her to inhale. "Why haven't I seen any cars? Maybe the road is closed up ahead." Of course, she hadn't seen any cars behind her either. "I'll think about it," Teresa said finally. Not long after that, they came to the road that Poppy indicated led to the church. Teresa didn't know what to do. Free continued to sleep, and she hesitated to wake him. She didn't know how to behave around him now that they were lovers. He was playing it cool, but she supposed that was only because Poppy was with them. She was anxious to be alone with him again. He had an incredible body, and he made her feel as if her body were a diamond to be cherished. Bill had never made her feel that way. He had talked a lot about love and friendship, but he never wanted intimacy. Probably because he had known from the start that he was going to dump her. He had been biding his time until she was almost vulnerable. If she got the chance, it would be fun to flaunt her romance with Free in front of him. It was incredible how swiftly things had happened between them. Then again, she had made a vow never to speak to Bill again. "You're going to have to slow down," Poppy warned, as a road off to their left rushed closer. Teresa found herself hitting the brake, although she didn't want to. Free stirred at the sudden deceleration. Teresa flipped on her blinker and turned off the main road. "I don't know why we have to see this man," Teresa muttered. Free opened his eyes and yawned. "Where are we?" he asked. "We're going to church," Poppy said. Free was not impressed. "Did she talk you into stopping, Teresa?" "More or less," Teresa said. "You don't have to see the priest, you know," Free said. "It's not a requirement. I've never seen him." Teresa smiled. "I bet you've never been in a church in your life." "That is an astute observation," Free agreed. Poppy's worried that the road farther north is blocked, Teresa said. What do you think? I think if we drive fast enough, we'll be able to break on through to the other side, Free said. If it is blocked, you might be late to your show, Teresa said. We might have to head back south and circle around. That could take a long time. Free yawned again. I'm not worried about it. What did you say was the name of the club where you're going to be doing your show? Teresa asked. Free glanced over. His eyes were bloodshot with fatigue, but his mouth looked fresh. She wished she could kiss him right then. He'd know how to make her feel better. We're booked into Club Bardo's, he said. I don't see how you could have forgotten the name. Teresa laughed. It's been a long and exciting night. Free nodded. And it isn't over yet. He paused. What are you going to tell the priest? The trees around them were beginning to thin. It was a relief in a way to Teresa. They had begun to make her feel claustrophobic the last few miles. In the distance she could hear bells chiming. She rolled down her window. The rain had stopped and the moon had come out, shedding much-needed light. She smelled flowers, daisies and roses and carnations. I'm not Catholic, Teresa said. I don't have to tell him anything. That's the spirit, Free said. The church had to be a Spanish mission because it couldn't be anything else in that part of California. Yet it wasn't. It was like no mission ever made. The thing could only have been a cathedral lifted from the center of old England. It was constructed of fat, square-shaped granite blocks. There were people milling around outside it, lots of people, and the sun hadn't even begun to show its face yet. Teresa was confused beyond belief. 2 alien structures in one night. A witch from the Twilight Zone, and now a priest from God knew where. She really should just have gone to bed and not tried to run away from home when it was raining so hard. Park over to the right there, away from the people, Poppy said. They're not used to cars here. How do they get here then? Teresa asked. They just show up, Poppy said. Losers, all of them, Free remarked. Are you coming in with us? Teresa asked him. He laughed. Give me a break. Teresa parked and climbed out with Poppy, stretching her legs and back. One thing she did have to admit, the smells were delightful. Yet she could see flowers nowhere. She suspected the gardens were in an inner courtyard. The church and adjoining structures appeared to have been built around one. Free reached in the back seat for his garment bag. I thought I'd change so you wouldn't recognize me when you get back, he said. She stuck her head back in the open window. I'm only doing this to make Poppy happy, she said softly, so that Poppy couldn't hear. You don't have to make her happy, Free said, also whispering. You only have to make me happy. She grinned mischievously. It's my pleasure to do that. She started to stand back up. Free reached over and grabbed her arm. He studied her intently, the change in his expression dramatic. I'm going to need a favor from you soon, he said. What kind of favor? You'll see. Can I count on you? Sure. For anything? He asked. Absolutely, Teresa said. He released her. Good. Teresa walked toward the cathedral with Poppy by her side, the main bell tower rising high above their heads. Teresa could not understand how she had not seen pictures of this building. It had to be one of the most impressive structures in all of America. But she didn't ask Poppy to explain the riddle to her, because every time Poppy spoke, she created another riddle. Don't talk to any of the people except for the priest and me, Poppy warned. Why not? She asked. It wouldn't be a good idea. Trust me. I don't trust you. I don't know why I'm doing this. Do you know why? Yes, Poppy said. You're here because you're tired of driving. That makes sense. Hey, can I ask you something and please give me a straight answer? Were John and Candy real people? Yes. How did you and Free know them so intimately? We were very close, Poppy said. You answered sarcastically when Free asked if he had narrated the end of their story accurately. Had he? No, but he didn't lie. It's complicated. Can you tell me what really happened from what you know? Maybe later, Poppy said. Poppy did not steer them to the massive front doors of the church, but rather to a side entrance that opened into a hall and then into the courtyard Teresa had pictured. They passed two old nuns playing with a child tossing pennies into a fountain. The other people milling about were incredibly nondescript, to such an extent that it made Teresa wonder what was wrong with them. There wasn't one of them that stood out. Certainly they paid her and Poppy no heed. It was as if they had stumbled upon the church and were content to walk around outside in the moonlight and let time pass. Teresa again wondered what time it was. She regretted once more having lost her watch. The sun would have to come up soon, she thought. The opening led into a hall that led into a courtyard, and Teresa got to see the flowers she had whiffed a mile away. They were gorgeous, but not structured in neat and tidy rows, rather growing free around a maze of bushes and trees. The flowers she had smelled, and others as well. Phlox and lilies and birds of paradise, poking their beaks out of green branches that sparkled with drops from the recent rain. She would have liked to have enjoyed them for a bit, but Poppy urged her forward. They entered the church from the side. A Catholic Mass was in progress. People sure got up early in these parts, she thought. The rows of pews were endless and at least half full. Most of the people in attendance were older, except for the choir at the back on the upper level. Teresa couldn't see them clearly, but from the sound of their voices, many must have been children. Their responsive lines echoed through the vast hall as the priest up front spoke in thundering Latin. Latin? That was supposed to have gone out years ago. They reached into wooden bowls stationed near the door, filled with holy water, and blessed themselves. Teresa had to follow Poppy's example to get it right. Is that your father leading the Mass? Teresa asked softly, instinctively feeling the blasphemy of talking in such a sacred place. She nodded toward the altar, shimmering with gold and silver under the warm light of 1,000 tall white candles. The odor of incense was strong, penetrating. Teresa could feel it inside her brain. No, Poppy whispered. My father generally takes confessions at this time. She nodded down a side aisle, which branched off at various points into smaller private chapels with altars, where candles could be lit and offered for the blessing of a specific saint. Poppy led her forward. Teresa reached out and clasped Poppy's hand, although she wasn't sure why. The dark was not so thick that she couldn't see where she was going. Poppy squeezed her hand in return and flashed her a quick smile. It was the first time Teresa had seen her display anything more than melancholy or boredom. She regretted her comment to Poppy of a moment ago, that she didn't trust her. She realized Poppy had not wanted to stop at the church for her own sake, but for the sake of Teresa. But confession? What do I have to confess? Even if I did have something, why should I do it now, in this place? They came to a wooden door, an undistinguished door given the scale and eloquence of the church. Poppy nodded. He's in here, she said. Aren't you coming in with me? Teresa asked. I can't. Why not? It's something you have to do on your own, Poppy said. I could only bring you here.
Who says?
It's the way it is.
Then Poppy did something most unexpected. She reached out and hugged Teresa. She actually kissed her cheek.
Tell him everything, she whispered in her ear. Be an open book and listen to what he has to tell you. Above all else, don't be afraid. He's here to help you.
But why do I need help? Teresa asked as Poppy released her. Poppy smiled again and patted her shoulder.
Ask him. Be brave, be honest. She nodded. He's waiting for you.
Teresa opened the door and stepped inside. The room was small and cozy. There was one window, a stained glass scene of Jesus sitting on a hilltop, surrounded by a group of children of all races. The window was closed, but Teresa knew it faced the courtyard. The hint of light behind the window surprised her, though, because if the sun was coming up, it wouldn't be rising in the west. The window glowed with warm yellow light, nevertheless, and was most enchanting. A vase of fresh flowers stood on the windowsill, filling the room with fragrance. The priest was approximately 50 years old. He sat in a simple wooden chair beside the window, reading a book by the light of a nearby candle. Dressed entirely in brown, he had thin silver hair and a ruddy expression. He looked up as she entered, and his gray eyes were kind. He closed his book and motioned for her to sit on the chair in front of him. "Hi," she said, crossing the room and sitting down. The chairs were not so close together that she felt cramped. She crossed her legs and let the warmth of the room seep into her. Her shakes and nausea began to subside, though her wrist continued to throb. The priest smiled faintly, and she added, "Poppy wanted me to talk to you." His smile widened.
Do you want to talk to me, Teresa?
She paused. "How did you know my name? Did Poppy call you and tell you I was coming?"
In a manner of speaking, but you'll find I know a thing or two about you. I don't say that to make you nervous. It's my job to know.
Teresa felt uneasy. I already met a woman tonight who knew everything about me. I didn't like her. She scared me. The priest was gentle.
Do I scare you?
She considered. There was truly a warm and loving atmosphere in the room. It was as if she had finally come home after a long adventure. "No," she said. "You seem like a nice man. But I have to tell you up front that I don't know why I'm talking to you. I'm not a Catholic. I've never been to confession before." She made a helpless gesture with her hands. I wouldn't know where to begin.
Maybe I can help you. I understand you were recently involved with a young man and that the two of you broke up and your feelings were hurt.
Teresa shrugged. "I'm getting over it. It's no big deal."
But it is a big deal to you.
She smiled. "Can you read my mind?"
I can see the pain on your face. Tell me about it, Teresa.
Teresa considered. He was perceptive. She had to give him that. She figured there'd be no harm in talking to him about what Bill had done to her. She had talked about little else all night. "All right," she said. "Bill was my boyfriend. He was the first boyfriend I ever had. I cared about him a great deal, and I thought he cared about me. He acted like he did. He helped me get a singing job at a well-respected club near the beach. He gave me confidence in myself, something I never had before. But it was all ruined when he cheated on me behind my back with my best friend, Renee."
You say he gave you confidence in yourself. Did he do anything else for you?
He did a lot of things. He made me feel things I had never felt before. He bought me things, small gifts. He went out of his way for me. Once I was sick, and he took me to the doctor when... Her voice trailed off. But I did a lot of things for him, too. I was totally devoted to him. He was not devoted to me.
Why wasn't he devoted to you? The priest asked.
Because he was a jerk, that's why. I'm sorry, but I think that's what it boils down to.
Before he met your friend, Renee, did you feel he loved you?
He told me he did. I believed him, but it was just another lie.
Do you feel he loves you now?
She made a face. No way. He wouldn't have dumped me so easily.
Was it easy for him?
She forced a laugh. I think it was a lot easier for him than me.
Go on, Teresa.
Well, it hurt me. I felt like I wanted to die. I can't tell you how much it hurt. It was like I was living a perfect fairy tale, and I was so happy and everything was so perfect. But then, bang! Wake up, girl. The dream is over. Your boyfriend is sleeping with your best friend.
How do you know Bill was sleeping with Renee behind your back?
I caught them. The priest was surprised.
You did?
Yeah.
When?
Today.
When did Bill break up with you?
The priest asked. Today. Well, it's early Sunday morning right now. He actually dumped me Saturday evening. Renee was there at my parents' apartment. He gave me the news, and then he left with her.
Did you see him after that?
No. I mean, yes. She lowered her head. I saw him, but I didn't talk to him.
Because you found him in Renee's arms?
A tear ran down her face. Yes.
Tell me about it. It will help.
She sniffed. How will it help?
You have to feel your pain before you can offer it to the divine.
How do you offer your pain to the divine? She asked.
You just do it. It's easy. It's the only way to deal with situations that are too painful to bear. But first you have to accept what is real. Tell me what really happened, Teresa.
She looked up into his kind, gray eyes. She had just met him. She didn't even know his name, but she would have liked to have had him for her father, even if he was a priest. He had the most gentle voice. All right, she said. I'll tell you. Teresa lay on the floor a long time after Bill left with Renee. It was dark when she finally sat up and looked around. The apartment was empty, and she did not expect her parents back until the following evening. She had nothing to do and no one to do it with. That was not going to change, she thought. Bill was gone. Her Bill, taken from her by her friend, and he was not coming back. But that thought, Bill is gone for good, was not that clear in her head, nor were the other thoughts. She wouldn't let them be. The ideas floated in and out of her awareness in the form of, Bill's going to be harder to talk to now, or Bill doesn't know what he's doing, and I'm going to kill those two. She was sad beyond words. She was madder than hell, and she was confused. Her confusion was vast. She thought if she could talk to Bill again, maybe just for a few minutes, things would become clearer. He had said something about not wanting to leave her at that time, so he must still care about her. He couldn't want to end it just like that. He had never even slept with her, for God's sakes. Teresa went into the kitchen and got herself a glass of water. The lights in the apartment were off. The dark was of peculiar comfort to her. It shielded her from things that would have been too harsh to look upon at the moment. Just before she left the kitchen, her fingers grasped an object, a steak knife. Her parents loved steak, but she enjoyed only fish and chicken. She was a semi-vegetarian. She picked up the steak knife anyway, and a powerful image. It was so clear, so strong, it might have been a vision. Of her stabbing Bill and Renee flashed through her mind. She saw the blade cutting through their flesh, felt their blood spurting over her arms. Yet the image was so grotesque it made her shudder, and she pushed it away. The knife. What did she do with the knife? She had slipped it into her back pocket. Why? There was no why. She was upset. She left her apartment and drove to Bill's house. For a long time she just sat in her car and stared at the place. All the lights were off. Bill's car was parked out front, beside Renee's. She had no trouble recognizing her best friend's vehicle, but she didn't fully comprehend what it signified. Oh, she knew it probably meant Renee was inside with Bill, but that they were together, really together, was hard for her to fathom. Even Bill couldn't have forgotten her that fast. She eventually got out of the car. At the front door of the house, she didn't knock. She had a key and just went inside. Bill's parents, she remembered, were away for the weekend. It was kids' weekend, she thought. Anything goes. Anything at all. She found them in the family room, lying on the floor in front of a smoldering fire, lying together asleep beneath a patchwork quilt, their faces blank under the spell of sleep. She stood watching them, and they didn't move once. Their breathing, though, she could hear that. The sound of air going in and out of their lungs annoyed her. She was confused, but she knew this much. They weren't supposed to be sleeping together. She took the knife out of her back pocket. The steel of the blade glowed red in the faint light radiating from the low flames in the fireplace. The vision she'd had in her kitchen returned as her mind began to clear. What was there to be confused about? This afternoon she had been Bill's girlfriend. Tonight, Renee was his girlfriend. 3 minus 1 equals 2. The mathematics were simple. Goodbye, Teresa, and thanks for introducing us. You were finally good for something. Bill changed partners like he did shirts, she thought in disgust. He'd have a hard time, though, taking off the shirt he was wearing now if there was a knife stuck through it, all the way through to the inside of his rib cage. Renee also would have a difficult time combing her beautiful black hair if it was soaked with blood. Dried blood was known to cause hard-to-manage knots. Teresa didn't know which one she hated more. She stepped into the family room.
Then what did you do?
The priest asked. Teresa was embarrassed. I came to my senses. I'm no killer. I dropped the knife and ran out of the house. When I got home, I packed an overnight bag and got in the car and started driving. I picked up Poppy Corn and her friend, Freedom Jack, just before I got on the freeway. She shrugged. And now I'm here. That's my confession.
Are you running away from home?
The priest asked. She had denied the question all night, but it was harder to lie in the presence of this fine man. It seemed he had an intuitive sense for when the truth was bent. Lowering her head, she sniffed again. Her face was still damp from her tears. I am, yes, she said.
Do you know where you're running to? He asked.
No.
You're going nowhere.
He was not asking her. He was stating a fact. She raised her head. I suppose I'll end up somewhere, she said. The priest surprised her. He shook his head.
Not necessarily. You're in trouble, Teresa. There's nowhere left for you to go.
Suddenly she was having trouble breathing. The confessional room that she had found cozy only minutes ago now seemed claustrophobic. Even the smell of the flowers was bothering her, making her sinuses swell. Something had begun to clog her head. Pressure grew in the center of her skull. It grew as her heart throbbed there, the same throbbing she had experienced in her wrist. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. I've done nothing wrong. I dropped the knife and left Bill's house.
Are you sure you dropped the knife?
The priest asked. Yes, positive. I wouldn't lie about it. The priest sighed. He looked down at the book resting closed on his lap. It was an old volume with a cover dried with time. She couldn't tell if it was a Bible, though. There was no title on the outside.
The worst lies are the lies we tell ourselves, the priest said. We live in denial of what we do, even what we think. We do this because we're afraid. We fear we will not find love, and when we find it, we fear we'll lose it. We fear that if we do not have love, we will be unhappy. But the nature of God is love. The nature of God is happiness. We are a part of God, and because of that, we have nothing to fear.
He looked at her and smiled gently.
Relax, Teresa, and tell me what happened. I will not judge you. No one will. I am not asking you to confess. I am only asking that you drop your state of denial.
Teresa was perspiring heavily. But I've told you everything I know. I did not stab them. I wouldn't have done that. You have to believe me.
What did you do then?
I left. I ran away. I got in my car, went home for a few minutes to pack, and ran away from home. What do you want from me? She burst out crying. I can't tell you what I don't remember.
The priest was interested. Is it that you can't remember something?
Yes, I can't remember what I did with the knife.
The priest leaned forward. Let me help you remember. This is where you are having trouble. You left Bill's house.
Stop, Teresa cried, jumping to her feet. I have to go. I'm sorry, but I can't go through this. I don't deserve this. I've done nothing wrong except be abused. That's my only crime, Father.
The priest took her in with sorrow on his face. It's a crime to be abused, he said.
You're damn right it is.
Teresa strode from the room. Poppy was waiting outside, kneeling in a pew beside the confessional booth. She could have been deep in prayer for all Teresa knew or cared, but Poppy jumped up and chased after her as Teresa hurried from the church, out into the fragrant courtyard, and then back toward the front of the church. Teresa had eyes only for her car. She needed to get in the car and get away as fast as she could. She had felt that way at her apartment. What happened? Poppy gasped, running to catch up with her. I learned that the road up ahead is blocked, Teresa said. But it doesn't matter. We can break on through to the other side. Poppy stopped dead in her tracks. That's what they all think. Chapter 13. They were in the car driving north at high speed, the road deserted in both directions. The rain fell again, in torrents now. Poppy was silent in the back seat. Free fidgeted in the front, wired to the max. He had changed into a black suit with a red hat. His garment bag lay folded on his lap. It appeared to be empty. He was talking about a place up ahead that he said she had to see. They have great food there, he said. You can get anything you want. The service is wonderful. They have an incredible wine selection. There's no waiting either. Only a few people know about the place. It sounds nice, Teresa muttered, distracted. The expression of sorrow on the priest's face continued to haunt her. Of course, he was a nice man, but he'd had nothing really important to say to her. She didn't know why Poppy had been so anxious for her to meet him. He'd been way off talking about her being in a state of denial. She hadn't done anything wrong. What was there to deny? Anyway, how could you expect a priest to understand relationships? They were all celibate. The sky was growing lighter. Dawn was not far off. It's just up ahead, Free continued. I've been here before. There's nothing you want that they don't got. He slapped the dashboard. Hell, they even sell money. It's that full-service kind of place. Neat, Teresa said. She spoke to Poppy. Have you been there before? Once, Poppy mumbled, for cigarettes. Teresa laughed, although she didn't feel much like laughing. She was so close to throwing up that she had to drive with the window down, even with the rain blowing. We'll be sure to get your cigarettes, Teresa said. Don't bother, Poppy said. I'm trying to quit. It's here, Free shouted, pointing excitedly. Turn off here. Wow, I can't believe it. We made it. I was afraid we were never going to get away from that goddamn church.
What turnoff is this? Teresa asked, squinting through the pouring rain. She must have the name of the road wrong. It couldn't be.
Bardo's Lane,
Free said. But isn't that the name of the club you're supposed to play? Teresa asked. Free laughed hysterically.
Yeah, he said. We were closer than we thought. What a break. We're already here. Amazing.
But you said the club was in San Francisco, Teresa said.
I was wrong,
Free said, rubbing his hands fiendishly together.
We don't have to go any farther. We can satisfy all our shopping needs here.
Our shopping needs? Teresa asked.
Yes, Free said. We're going to a mini-mart. I love mini-marts, and this one's my favorite. Oh, there it is. Make a left up ahead, Teresa. Let's just you and I go inside. We don't want Poppy with us. She's in a grumpy mood, and she'll just spoil our party.
You don't want to come in, Poppy? Teresa asked as she pulled to a halt in front of the store. Free's excitement bewildered her. The mini-mart was like a million others in the world. It appeared to have no special qualities. Yet she was relieved to see it. She figured she could buy some aspirin and maybe something to settle her stomach. She was through with ginger mints for the night.
No, Poppy said.
You should at least get out and stretch, Teresa said, opening her car door. Free was already outside and standing in the rain, getting soaked. He was the craziest guy.
I stretched my legs at the church,
Poppy said flatly. Have it your way, Teresa said, climbing out. Free hurried her to the door of the store, which was good given the amount of rain coming down. But just before they went inside, under the shelter of an overhang at the front of the place, he stopped and wanted to talk.
Remember I asked if you could do me a favor and you said yes?
He asked. Yeah.
You told me you would do anything for me?
I will. I like you a lot, Free. He leaned over and gave her a quick kiss.
And I love you, baby. But I need a pretty big favor at this stop. I'm only asking this because I know you and I are going to be together for at least a long while, and I'll need the money to take care of you and love you, and you just gotta help me out, you see, because Poppy won't. She never would. That's just the way she is, and I can't change it. Do you understand?
Teresa chuckled. Hold on, you're confusing me. What favor can I do for you? Just tell me and I'll do it.
Do you have your knife?
My knife?
Your mother's steak knife? Didn't you say you had it in your back pocket?
No, I don't know what you're talking about. She smiled. The only thing I have in my back pocket is that joker you put there when you pinched my butt.
Check it out, Free ordered.
What?
Check in your pocket and see if you've got your knife. I might need you to use it in a second.
Teresa stuck her hand in her pocket just to prove that she didn't have a knife, because it was a ridiculous assumption. She didn't walk around with a knife, and besides, she couldn't have sat in the car for the last how many hours with something as long and hard as a steak knife snugged up next to her. Ouch! A hot pain stabbed at her left hand, the one she had thrust in her pocket. She quickly pulled it out to see that it had blood on it. Free was right. She poked more carefully into her pocket with her right hand and drew out the knife. It was the same knife she had taken to Bill's house. I can't believe it, she gasped.
Let's get inside.
But I'm bleeding.
We'll get you a Band-Aid.
He grabbed her arm.
Come on, we don't have much time. The sun's starting to come up.
They entered the store. A tall man with chestnut brown skin, a white goatee, and a bald head stood behind the counter. He looked half-starved, like an Ethiopian who had seen one drought too many. He nodded in their direction but didn't speak. Teresa thrust her knife back in her pocket, out of sight. Free quickly dragged her around the store collecting beer, donuts, a carton of milk, and Junior Mints. She started to tell him that she didn't want any candy, but before she could speak, he was already piling the articles up on the checkout counter. And besides, he had just pulled out a gun and was pointing it at the tall African.
"Give me everything you've got," Free said calmly, staring the man in the eye, "or you won't have to worry about renewing your health insurance policy."
"Free!" Teresa screamed.
"Don't tell him my name," Free said impatiently. "We are robbing the store. If you identify me to him, he'll be able to identify me to the cops. I can't let that happen. I'd have to kill him before I let that happen."
"But why are you doing this?" she cried.
"Keep the bills coming," Free said to the man, who was nervously emptying the register on the counter beside the beer and the donuts. Free continued, speaking in her direction. "I'm doing this because I need the money. I'm in love with you, and I will have to support you for the next 60 years. Also, there's some fine white powder I've grown very fond of, and it costs more than you can imagine." He paused, and his head whirled in the direction of the door. "Take out your knife. We are about to have company. Do it." Teresa withdrew the knife from her pocket. Why, she didn't know. She wasn't going to hurt anyone with it. She had never hurt anyone in her life. A young woman walked into the store. At first, Teresa thought it was Poppy. They were about the same height and had the same long dark hair. But this woman was a few years older. She wore a nurse's uniform. Her eyes grew big when she saw Free with a gun. "Stay!" Free shouted to her. "Get your hands up. Move over to my partner. Slowly. Don't try anything funny or your boyfriend is going to be sleeping alone tonight. Cover her, baby." Teresa stood helpless. "I can't." Free shoved her in the direction of the young woman. "Don't argue with me. Stick your knife at her throat and keep it there." Teresa slipped behind the woman and raised the tip of the blade to her neck. The woman shook with fear 2 inches in front of her, and Teresa was grateful that she couldn't look into her eyes. Teresa felt as if reality had fractured into a million insane pieces. Free was such a great guy. She had slept with him for God's sakes. But here he was, a common thief like John. A heroin addict, too, maybe. No wonder the guys had been friends. This cannot be happening. Sirens sounded in the distance. No, they weren't that far away. "Jesus Christ," Free swore. "Not again. Teresa, grab her by the hair and don't let her go." He started to scoop the money into the pockets of his black coat, his gun still leveled at the man. He shouted at the store employee, You back up. You get your hands up and don't look at me." "Jack," Teresa pleaded. She had taken hold of the woman's hair to pull her closer, even pressing the blade more firmly against her throat. But she was losing it. She was 1 inch from fainting. The store whirled around her like a merry-go-round. The sirens screamed. Everything was happening so fast. The cops were practically on the doorstep. "We're going to have to make a run for it," Free yelled, dollar bills falling out of his pockets. He backed away from the tall man. "We can't leave any eyewitnesses. We're going to have to kill them, baby." "No," Teresa cried. "Yes," Free cackled. He was having a good time. "We'll waste them and drive back to L.A. and spend all our money in all the wrong places." Free shook his gun at the man. "Say goodbye to truth, justice, and the American way." "No!" Teresa screamed. Free shot the man in the face. The bullet entered his nose and left behind a shattered mound of red, dripping tissue. The man fell far and hit hard. Free threw his arms in the air and whirled in her direction. "Slit her throat," he ordered. No, Teresa cried. The word is yes. Free laughed. Ha ha. Open her veins. Yes. Make her bleed. Yes. Do it. The police are coming. Don't ask me to, Teresa began, but she didn't get to finish because the young woman suddenly tried to struggle free. Perhaps she figured her odds were poor just standing around, and Teresa would have privately agreed with her. But in the woman's struggle, she shook forward, and the knife Teresa had at her neck accidentally cut her a little bit. It was definitely an accident, but it wasn't exactly a tiny cut. Because the neck was chalked with big important veins, and the blade was razor sharp and, well, Teresa cut her bad enough so that the blood began to flow. Bad enough so that the woman collapsed on the floor the moment she shook free of Teresa's hold. Free laughed as he looked down at the nurse squirming at his feet, her hand raised to try to stop the bleeding. Teresa, he said, you did it to her faster and more efficiently than I could have. He raised his gun and pointed it at the woman's head. But now that you've passed your test, there's no reason your second victim should have to suffer. You can't, Teresa moaned. Free shot the nurse in the back of the neck. The blood and soft tissue splattered Teresa's face. Free stuck his gun back in his belt. I can, and so can you. Let's quit this place, babe. We can have beer and donuts back home, in L.A. Free grabbed her arm and dragged her out of the store, into the failing night where they saw no police. They climbed in the car. Free drove. Teresa stared at the blood on her shirt, a nurse's blood. Poppy lit a cigarette and stared out the window. Bored. Poppy was bored, and they had just killed 2 people. Teresa didn't understand anything. This is a fast car, Free said, getting onto the freeway. Anything that had happened since she had left home. We'll be there soon, Free said, heading north. Even the things she could remember. Where? She whispered. Nowhere, the priest had said. Your place, Free said. The road led nowhere. This isn't the right way, Teresa mumbled, because she was in trouble. Yes, it is, Free said, because she had done something wrong. I live the other way, she insisted, with her knife. We'll be getting off the freeway in a second, Free said, the knife she had not left at Bill's house. No, she said. No, the knife in her pocket. It's the next exit, Free said. The knife she had used to cut into someone's skin. I live 300 miles from here, she cried. But whose skin? Who was really bleeding? Get real, Free said. Bardo's Lane. Border Lane. Teresa's stomach lurched. I feel sick. Border world. Bardo's. We're getting off here, Free said, slowing. Chapter 14. They drove into a residential area. The rain continued to fall, but lightly now, as if the growing daylight was capable of drying up the clouds that had plagued them all night. They turned into an apartment complex and parked in a carport. Free jumped out, and Poppy and Teresa got out slowly. Actually, Poppy had to help Teresa up. She was so sick she had trouble staying on her feet. Where are we? She mumbled. Same old Teresa, Free said, striding into the complex. Poppy helped her as they followed him. I'm going to have to lie down soon, Teresa said. Yes, Poppy said, her voice gloomy as midnight. Free led them into an apartment. He had the key. Teresa collapsed on a couch near the door and closed her eyes for an instant. To say she was in shock would have been like saying victims of serious burns were familiar with pain. Her pain, devastating as it was, could now hardly cut through the fog she had entered. They had killed 2 people. Blood was all over
her clothes. Plus, she was bleeding. She had accidentally cut her left wrist with her knife, like she had accidentally cut the nurse's throat. Oh, God! Free had just aimed the gun at them and pulled the trigger. All for a few lousy bucks. The sin of it all. Having slept with him, she must now have disease growing inside her. Teresa opened her eyes and looked around. The apartment looked familiar. Very. "Where are we?" she mumbled again. Neither of them answered her right away. Free was in his glory, skipping around the living room as if he had just found a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. He had his empty green garment bag in his hand and was unfolding it on the floor. Poppy sat smoking at a table in the adjacent kitchen. Teresa could hear water running. She turned her head with great effort and saw that the door to the bathroom was lying partway open and that someone had left the water running in the bathtub and that it was overflowing. "Somebody should turn that water off," she said weakly.
"Why don't you do it?" Free asked.
"I'm too sick to get up," Teresa said.
"Always an excuse with you," Free muttered.
She was offended. "You killed those people, you animal." Free laughed. He was smoothing the wrinkles out of his empty bag. What had he done with his other clothes? Just thrown them away?
"It was fun," he said. "Did you have fun? You killed one of them too, remember?"
"That was an accident," Teresa protested. Free giggled.
"What a memory."
Teresa cried weakly. "Would somebody please turn off that water? The noise of it is hurting my head." Free paused in his task and approached.
"You're the only one who can turn off the water, babe. Poppy and I ain't got no hands."
He stopped.
"Do you want to watch TV?"
"Huh? No."
"I have a video you might enjoy,"
Free said, ignoring her. He pulled a tape from his coat pocket and walked over to the VCR. He thrust the tape into the machine and turned on the TV.
"You keep asking where we are, and I've already told you, but you can think of this tape as a kind of a roadmap to the highways in these parts."
"I can't watch anything right now," Teresa whispered, her head falling to one side. She had to struggle to remain conscious, and she had to ask herself why she was trying at all. Because if she just blacked out, she could forget her pain. It was so tempting just to escape. Yet something kept her eyes open.
"Believe me, you'll watch this," Free said.
The tape started. It showed a young woman closing her apartment door and striding toward her car in the night. The camera followed the young woman. She was really only a girl, as she threw an overnight bag in the back seat and climbed in. The girl started the car and, looking both ways, pulled out into the rain. The rain. Lightning flashed, giving her a glimpse through the damp window. Recognition. The girl. "That's me," Teresa gasped, sitting up.
"Yes," Free said. "That's you leaving your house this evening."
"Where did you get that tape?" she asked.
"I have friends in high places," Free said. "I have more friends in low places. Do you want me to rewind the tape?"
"No," she said quickly. "I want you to turn it off. You shouldn't make tapes of people without their knowledge." Free snickered.
"I have a tape of you in the most compromising of positions."
He leaned close, and she couldn't imagine how she had thought his mouth tasted fresh. His breath reminded her of a sick patient in a hospital. It stunk of decay.
"I have a tape of you naked in the bathtub. What do you think of that, Miss Teresa?"
"You lie," she swore. He hooted at the ceiling.
"I lie?"
He spun around, making a dance of it, and skipped back to his bag.
"All right, I'll leave you in ignorance. You seem comfortable there."
He knelt on the floor by the bag and pulled down the zipper.
"An old army issue,"
he said gleefully. The bag intrigued her, but not in a good way. She had seen something like it before. "Where did you get that thing?" she asked.
"These bags were used in the 60s and the 70s, Free said. Many of our finest young men returned home from Vietnam in one of these."
"A body bag," she whispered. He had been carrying it around all night, slowly emptying it. "For what?" "Wrong question." "For whom?"
"Right,"
Free said with a giggle. The need to know, even in denial, was what was keeping her eyes open. Teresa got up with great effort and turned on the TV and VCR. She pressed rewind, counted time by the numbers, then pressed play. She was taking a bath, naked.
"I told you," Free snickered behind her.
A hot bath with the water running a little so that it wouldn't get cold when she started to get cold. Teresa glanced in the direction of the bathroom where the water was overflowing and soaking the carpet of the hallway. The water was not entirely clear. There was something in it, floating around, but also thinning out. Teresa glanced back at the tape. She was picking up a knife, that young, pretty girl. So much pain on her face, but no extra pain as she took the blade in her right hand and cut a deep gash across her left wrist. Pain, so she had believed at the time, was only for the living. There was no need to open both veins. Her parents were out. She had all night to die. The blood spurted silently into the water, and the girl leaned back and closed her eyes. The girl had been wrong about death taking away all her problems. Teresa turned off the tape. It all came clear to her in a single moment. The whole insane night. Of course, there were no witches, no castles, no magical priest. These things did not exist on the planet Earth. "I killed myself," she said.
"Yes," Free cheered behind her, "and I'm here to collect you, my hard-earned reward. That's what I have this bag for."
Teresa stepped toward the kitchen, hugging the wall. She needed it for support. "Is it true?" she asked Poppy. "Am I dead?" Poppy was pale and exhausted. She ground at her cigarette in an ashtray.
"Almost," she said,
and the regret in her voice was plain. Teresa nodded. There was no sense denying it now. She did not need to step into the bathroom to see. There was a girl dying in there. "How long?" she asked.
"Not long," Poppy said.
Teresa nodded again. No wonder her wrist hurt. She remembered then, quite clearly, opening the vein. Her nausea must mean her heart was running out of blood to pump. "Who are you two?" she asked.
"My name is Candy," Poppy said. "Popcorn and Candy, you could call me. That's John behind you." She shrugged. "Sometimes I call him Jack."
"You're both dead?" Teresa asked.
"Yes," Poppy said.
Teresa coughed. "Why are you here?"
"For fun and profit," Free said. "He was here to tempt you," Poppy said. "At least that's what he thinks. I was here to help you if you wanted my help."
Poppy shook her head.
"You didn't want it, Teresa."
Teresa nodded. "How could you have helped me after what I did?"
"Bardos is the realm between the living and the dead," Poppy said. "On rare occasions it's possible to make choices here that affect where you go, whether you go anywhere."
"I made the wrong choices," Teresa whispered.
"You cut the poor nurse's throat," Free joined in. "Shut up," Poppy told him. She turned back to Teresa. "It wasn't so much what you did. It never is. It's what's inside. You wouldn't let the truth in." "You lied about everything," Free interrupted, now airing out the body bag, flapping it in the middle of the living room as if he were getting ready to set up a tent. "You never slept with Bill. He didn't want you. He wanted Renee and you couldn't face it. It's as simple as that.
Poppy slowly stood. She faced Free, who paused in his play with the bag to see what she'd do next. There was suddenly fire in Poppy's usually cool expression. She held out her arm and pointed at him.
You have a nerve calling Teresa a liar, she said, after the lies you told tonight. You're a hypocrite.
Free appeared genuinely perplexed.
What lies did I tell?
Poppy was impatient.
About John?
Free dropped his bag, suddenly angry.
I told it the way it was. I accept what I did, the good and the bad. I don't try to dress it up like Mother Teresa here, or like you, Poppy. Candy was nothing but a lazy chick with the loyalty of a politician. You prattled on about how she searched for John all those years. If she looked so hard, how come she didn't find him?
Where was she supposed to look? Poppy demanded.
She had no leads. John made sure he left none for her. It was John who ran from her, not the other way around. And why? Because he was embarrassed for screwing up. He didn't screw up. He was just trying to help her pass her stupid test. John didn't have to hit the teacher, Poppy said. Even when he did, even when he went to juvenile hall, it wasn't the end of the world. John could have called Candy at Berkeley when he got out. They could have worked something out together. They were strong together. John was weak when it really mattered, Poppy yelled. When he hurt his hand, what did he do? He felt sorry for himself. So he was in pain. Lots of people are in pain. They don't become junkies. They don't blame the world.
Free was indignant.
You don't know what pain is. You cakewalk through life. I suffered, Poppy said. Everybody suffers at one time or another. But I worked to make myself a life. I made mistakes, sure, plenty of them, but I didn't hurt anybody. I didn't try to hurt anybody either, Free cried.
Poppy clapped her hands together. It was as if she had been steering him in a direction and he had just taken a critical turn.
Yes, that's true. That's the truth you don't know. Listen to me. I came here tonight for you as much as for Teresa. You don't belong in this awful place, John. You belong with me.
Free snickered.
I can't go with you after what I've done.
What did you do? Poppy asked.
Free chuckled. In case you've forgotten, I killed you.
No, Teresa interrupted.
Free glared at her. You stay out of this. No, Poppy said quickly, eyeing Teresa closely. Let her talk. Think of her as an objective observer. Teresa?
Teresa pulled herself off the wall with what strength she had left. I enjoyed the story of Candy's life, she said. She sounded like a nice person, but it was John's story that kept me captivated. I think it was because he had so much potential and kept missing out on opportunities. Until the end, I thought he would turn it around. He would get his act together and find Candy and live happily ever after. I know you told me at the start that they weren't going to be together, but I still kept thinking they would be. Do you know what I mean?
No, Free said. You know nothing. You never even met John.
But I did, Teresa said. I met him through you. I got to know him pretty good. He had a hard time. I went through nothing compared to him. I admired him in a way. I really did. But you see, when you got to the part in the store, I knew you were lying. I spoke to Poppy about it. You can ask her. I know that John didn't kill Candy.
I did, he protested. I shot her in the heart. He looked at Poppy. You tell her.
Poppy shook her head.
She's just told you, John.
He was confused.
But I was there. I know what happened. No, Poppy said. I was there. I was in that store with the only man I had ever truly loved. You were there with your self-pity and your guilt. You carried your guilt to the grave. You didn't shoot me. The cop shot me trying to hit you. He killed me, accidentally, it's true, but he killed me nevertheless. When I got hit, you did everything you could to hold me up. and keep me from falling onto that dirty floor. Not because you were still using me as a shield, but because you wanted to hold me. You wanted that more than a chance to shoot back what you could have done. You wanted it more than a chance to surrender and to live. You just wanted to hold me. You died wanting that. Poppy took a step toward him. Why do you have to play the devil every night for the rest of eternity? You're not such a bad guy. I still love you. Do you still love me? Free stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, or perhaps as if he were seeing her after a very long time. Teresa didn't know when they had been alive. What did you want to tell me just before you died? He asked. That I named my son after you, Poppy said. You weren't making that up when we were in the car? Free asked. I told the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Free was silent again. Then he took a deep, shuddering breath. Yes, he said. Yes, Poppy asked. I still love you, Free said. Tough, cool, emotionless Poppy wept. She nodded her head and bit her lip. Yes, she said, and it could have been the most wonderful sound in the world, in the whole universe, to her. She threw open her arms. Hold me now, John. Hold me forever. They embraced. They kissed. It was wonderful, beautiful. Teresa even shed a tear. She was so happy for them. Happy, such a feeling for a dying soul to have. None of this changed the fact that she had slit open her wrist. No ruby slippers, no going home to a dead body. Teresa felt happy for them, but miserable for herself. You're not dead yet, Poppy said, looking over at her from Free's arms, reading her mind. But you said, Teresa began. Poppy separated herself from Free. She positively glowed, as a guardian angel should. Teresa had not realized angels could be so human. What did I say? Poppy asked. What did the priest say? Did you let him finish? Of course not. You ran out the door. You ran from your mistakes. But had you stayed, you would have heard that all mistakes are forgiven if you offer them to the divine. It's a very deep secret, this one. But I don't know how to offer anything, Teresa said. There is no how, Poppy said. The truth itself is a true offering. That would be accepted. What is the truth here? You tried to kill yourself? You can see that now, that you did it out of self-pity. You learned about self-pity from John's story. You demonstrated that right now. Forget about the people you killed tonight. They were already dead. Forget what happened at the witch's house. I don't care. You and Free behaved like children, but all that matters is that you've learned from each other. She poked Free in the side as she spoke. And to think, he came here tonight hoping to drag you down to the lower regions. Free smiled. They're not so bad once you learn the ropes there. Poppy gave him a look. Do you want to go back there? He scratched his head. Ah, no. He hugged her close. I think I'm ready for a change for the better. He paused. Are you sure I didn't kill you? Poppy laughed. Had you tried to shoot me, you would have missed. You were always missing me. She turned back to Teresa. What am I going to do with you, silly girl? Teresa fought a wave of dizziness. You're not physical. You can't drag me from the tub. I'll be dead by the time my parents get home. She lowered her head. It doesn't matter what kind of offering I make to God. Why don't you make it and see what happens? Poppy asked. But, she began. Go ahead, try it, Free said. What can it hurt? If it works for you, I might try it myself. What do I do? Teresa asked. Feel what you feel, Poppy said. Then let it go to the divine. It doesn't matter how you think of God. It only matters that you let him think of you. Can I close my eyes? She asked. Yes, Poppy said. Just don't die on us, Free said.
Teresa closed her eyes. She saw many things in the space inside. How good her life had been, the gifts she had been given, what with her voice and her writing, and yes, even her parents. She saw how devastated they would be to return home to find her dead. They had sacrificed a great deal to have and raise a daughter. Bill was there inside her heart as well, where she had left him when she had fallen in love with him. It was possible that she had to let him go, maybe even never see him again, but that was okay. He had enriched her life. He had not come to destroy her life. He was in love, and love was always good. He, too, would be devastated to learn she had committed suicide. And Renee, that mischievous little devil, well, girls would be girls, just as boys would be boys. Teresa found she couldn't hate her. She couldn't hate anyone, not even herself. Life was wonderful, it was terrible. It was both things together, and that was what made it so special. She was only sorry she had tried to throw her life away. Teresa felt a great weight lift. It caught her by surprise. It was just gone, the dread. Such a blessed relief. Poppy and Free caught her as she fell. They carried her to the couch where they lay her on her back. Teresa opened her eyes. "I'm going to die," she whispered. "Are you afraid?" Poppy asked. "No," she said honestly. "I'm just sad that I was so stupid. I was having a good time, really. Another few days, weeks, I would have felt better. I let my emotions carry me away." She coughed weakly. "I just wish I could let them carry me back." Poppy stroked the side of her face. "Do you want to go back?" "Yes," Teresa said. "More than anything, I want to live again." Poppy turned to Free. "What do you say? Don't you think, between one novice angel and one experienced devil, we could bring a spark back into Teresa Chafee's life?" Free was serious for a moment, staring down at Teresa. "I think it's possible. Anything's possible." Poppy smiled a radiant smile. She leaned over and kissed Teresa on the forehead. "Close your eyes and you will see that spark." "I will live?" Teresa asked. "Yes," Poppy said. "But how?" "Shh, you will see," Poppy said. "But why are you helping me? I mean, why you in particular?" "Why did God send me?" Poppy asked, amused. "Let's just say you're important to someone very important to me. Right now, you have no idea how much you'll be seeing of him." "But," Teresa began. "Sleep." Poppy reached down and gently shut Teresa's eyes. "Dream of living. The dream goes on and on." There was space, there was time. They existed as they had always existed. Yet it seemed as if she could go anywhere in either of them, for she had changed. She didn't seem to have a body, yet she felt someone nearby. This person, this being, was thinking of Bill, and so she thought of him as well. Then suddenly she was in Bill's family room as he slept in front of the fire with Renee beside him. Teresa could see that they were both fully dressed. She was happy to see them and felt none of the crushing pain she had felt earlier in the night. Yet at the same time she felt strangely distant, disconnected from the scene. Something was about to happen, and it was important, but she wasn't at all worried about how it would turn out. Most of all, she experienced great peace. The being she had noticed by her side a moment ago was still there, even though she could see no one besides Bill and Renee. Her attention was drawn to the fireplace. The logs had long ago given up their fuel to the flames, and all that was left were a few glowing embers. But a strange alchemy was taking place in those ashes. As she watched, a miniature cyclone spun in the midst of the burnt remains, and the embers glowed brighter at the sudden gush of air. Their orange light changed to a bright red, and the ash chased up the chimney as if called by an old man in a sleigh. Then came a loud crack as one of the few remaining pieces of wood exploded. A spark flew out of the fireplace, through a split in the grill, and landed on Bill's arm. He bolted upright from his deep slumber and looked around him anxiously. He peered directly at the point from which Teresa was observing him and rubbed his eyes. If he saw her, he didn't indicate he had. She certainly couldn't see herself. He brushed painfully at the spot where the spark had landed on his arm. Then he suddenly stopped and looked in the direction of the front door. A breeze stirred his hair. It came in from the outside. He stood and walked toward the door. Teresa followed him effortlessly. The door was lying wide open. There was a key stuck in the lock. It was Teresa's key. Bill had given her one for no good reason. He had painted it gold as a joke, telling her it was the key to heaven. She must have left it in the lock when she had come over to see him earlier in the night. Bill pulled the key from the lock. He glanced out the door at the street, back in the direction of sleeping Renee. Comprehension crossed his face, and horror. He ran into his bedroom and grabbed his shoes and his car keys. He didn't shut the door as he ran out of the house. Teresa wasn't sure where he was going, but she had a good idea. She wasn't totally indifferent to the proceedings. She hoped he made it in time. She hoped they both did. Epilogue. Sunlight poured in through an open window. She saw it even before she opened her eyes. Someone was calling her name. She rolled over in bed and looked at who it might be. The handsome face of a young man with dark hair came into her focus. It was funny how her vision was blurred like that, she thought. The guy was sitting in a chair beside her. What's he doing in my bedroom? That was just the thing. It wasn't her bedroom. She instantly recognized the anesthetic decor. A hospital. She was a patient in a hospital. She must have driven into a tree or something. "Hi," the guy said. "Are you a doctor?" she asked. He was dressed in white, but seemed kind of young.
"No, your doctor wanted me to sit with you. He thought you'd be coming around soon. How are you feeling?"
"I have a bummer of a headache, and my wrist." Teresa saw the bandage on her left wrist. It all came back to her in a flash. All the earthly parts. "God?" she whispered. The young man stood up quickly.
"I'll get your doctor."
"No, that's all right," Teresa said, surprised at the calm in her voice. It wasn't every day you tried to commit suicide. It was certainly a first for her. Yet she didn't feel overwhelmed by the immensity of what she had tried. She just felt slightly embarrassed and silly. She swallowed painfully. Her throat was dry. "Could you please get me a drink of water?" she asked.
"Sure."
The guy was happy to do something for her. She seemed to make him uneasy. Another nutcase, he probably thought. She would have to reassure him that she was not your normal attempted suicide. He handed her the glass, and she drank gratefully. "Who brought me in?" she asked.
"I think it was your boyfriend, Bill."
She nodded. For some reason, the news did not surprise her. "He used to be my boyfriend. He's going with my best friend now." The guy lowered his head.
"I'm sorry."
"Oh, it's a drag, I know. It really pissed me off when I found out. I wanted to cut them up into little pieces. But they're probably better off together. Do you know what I mean?" She was confusing the guy. She must sound way too philosophical considering what she had just done to herself.
"Yeah," he said. "Bill and a girl are waiting outside to see you. Your parents are here also. Should I tell them you're awake?"
"In a minute.
If you're not a doctor, what are you? I'm a college student, but I plan to be a doctor. He gestured to their surroundings. This is work study for me. She smiled. He was pretty cute. I hope I wasn't too much work for you. You were no work at all. You slept the whole time I was here. I tried to kill myself, she said suddenly. His dark eyes were sympathetic. I know. You must have been through a lot lately. She shrugged. It's been rough, but it gets that way sometimes. She added, I'm never going to try it again. I just wanted you to know that. The guy smiled with relief. That's what I wanted to hear. He stood. I'll go get your parents. Fine. He was at the door before she spoke next. Wait. He stopped. Yes? Why do you want to be a doctor? She asked. Why do you ask? Come on, tell me, Teresa said. Well, I want to help people, and doctors make lots of money. I like wearing white. He shrugged. My mother wanted me to be a doctor. You don't look like a mommy's boy to me. I'm not, he added. She died when I was very young. Teresa felt a pinch. I'm sorry. Yeah, she was a great mom. He opened the door. I'll be back in a few minutes, Teresa. Wait, she called. He stopped. Yes? You know my name. I don't know yours. That's not fair. You're right. My name is... Wait, she interrupted. He laughed at her. What is it this time? You're Johnny. He frowned. How did you know? I'm not wearing a name tag. Teresa was also puzzled. I don't know. I must have met you somewhere before. You look familiar. She glanced at the open window to her left, glad that the sun was out and the storm was finally over. She smiled suddenly. You look like someone I know, she said.